it on to record because Kayla is the host. Kayla, have you
Okay.
recorded? Okay, I see it. And so I'm going to introduce the person who's going to introduce you. And then we'll take it from there. And I have a feeling that we'll have a lot of people joining us. So if you hear the thing go ding, 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 it's just people coming home from work and joining us as we go along. So welcome everybody to the second of our lecture series. If you remember, last month we had Patty Limerick and Terrence Carroll kick us off. This month, we're really, really fortunate to have three icons, if you will, in the history of Colorado and especially the Black history of Colorado. So we have Judge Gary, but I'm not going to introduce you. I'm sorry. I'm going to introduce you to the student who's going to introduce you to them. So Newell, if you'll show yourself. Newell is a student at Lotus School for Excellence in Aurora, Colorado. And she's on our student advisory board as an exceptional student. And I'm going to let Newell take it from here.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Celeste mentioned, my name is Noelle, and I'm a member of the NHDC Student Board and proudly representing the Aurora region. Tonight, I'll be facilitating the workshop, which will be revolving around Lincoln Hills and its impact on Black people in Colorado and around the country. So I guess I'll start with the Honorable Judge Gary Jackson. He's a Colorado native who grew up in Denver, Colorado, and graduated with honors from George Washington High School, which is a part of DPS, and pursued his education at CU Boulder, earning his undergraduate degree and Juris Doctorate. He's been the owner of a law firm for 37 years, as well as the founder of the Sam Carey Bar Association, an organization providing a professional space for African-American judges and lawyers to exchange thoughts and ideas. Judge Gary Jackson has been a judge for 7 years and a profound leader in the Denver and Coloradan community, playing significant roles in funds that have granted over $250,000 in scholarships to deserving Black students. Honorable Judge Gary Jackson is a family man married to Regina Lee Jackson with 2 kids and 4 grandchildren. He retired in December 2020 and is now using his influential leadership as an activist for an increase in Black and Latino judges.
Newell, thank you very much. And thanks to the audience as well as to the other panel members. The way we're going to start is I'll speak first, and then Terry Nelson will speak second, and then we'll follow up with Steve Shepard. He will be batting third, and he'll speak last. I thought we would start with just some photographs of historic Lincoln Hills during the period of time that my great-grandfather arrived in Colorado in 1919. So if you look at those photographs, those are photographs of our cabin called the Zephyr View Cabin that was built in 1926. It was named Zephyr View because there is a train, the California Zephyr, that traverses the mountainside directly across the creek from our cabin. And so we call the cabin Zephyr View. Now, as you can see from those photographs, the cabin was made of natural materials. In other words, wood from the mountainside. The foundation is stones, river rock that would have been carried up from the South Boulder Creek. And if you look at that particular photograph, that is my great-grandfather, William Pitts. He's got his hat on, he's got his coat and tie on. And let me just tell you about the significance of William Pitts. He first came to Colorado in 1919 because he had a son that had been injured in World War I and was hospitalized at the VA. He came from Missouri. He was the son of a slave, the son of a slave master, but he learned to read and write. He learned the trade of being a carpenter. So in Missouri, he built homes and churches in Missouri. And he came to Colorado in 1919. And upon arriving in Colorado, he made a personal determination that there were better opportunities for Black people in Colorado than there were in Missouri, which was very, very segregated, lots of discrimination. And so he made the decision and wrote to his family back in Missouri in 1926 that if the family would come to Colorado, and that meant his daughter and son-in-law, if they would come to Colorado, he would build them a home, and he would also and what he did is he came to Colorado to the North Cherry Creek area. At that time, North Cherry Creek, where the famous shopping center is, was a city dump. And because it was a city dump, poor people were able to buy property there. My great-grandfather bought 3 lots in North Cherry Creek. He built 2 homes for family members on Garfield Street in North Cherry Creek. A third home he built on Harrison Street that he sold. And then he had the vision to buy several lots up in Lincoln Hills. So Lincoln Hills is the historic recreational area, the only Black-owned recreational area west of the Mississippi. So if you look at that particular photograph, my great-grandfather and my uncle, John H. Scott, used as a postcard to send to family members about Zephyr View, being up Coal Creek Canyon in Gilpin County. Now, back in those days, you can see the cars that are in front of the cabin. The roads from Denver to the cabin, although it's only 40 miles, and today when I drive up to the cabin, from my house to the cabin, it takes 55 minutes. But when my family would drive up to the cabin back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s with a dirt road, it would take them 4 hours to get to the cabin. So what they would do is that they would come to the cabin on a Friday and stay at the cabin until Sunday. Because the roads were dirt, dirt roads, it was really only accessible Lincoln Hills to my family members and to others between Memorial Day, May 30th, and Labor Day, which is about the early part of September. And that's because of the harsh winter, just like the winter or the snow that we had last night. It would be those types of snows up in Lincoln Hills. Therefore, it was not accessible other than during the summertime. That particular photograph there, the little girl to the left that sort of got her hand on underneath her eye and her nose, that's my mother, Nancelia Scott Jackson. So she would have been probably 7 or 8 years of age at the time. Next to her was her older brother, Johnny, who was probably 9 or 10 at the time, on the ground, or other siblings. And if you look towards the back of the cabin, you'll see an outhouse. So it wasn't until probably the 60s that we got electricity, running water. And so we had to use the water from the creek for drinking and cooking and bathing. And so if we had to go to the bathroom, even late at night, we'd have to leave the cabin and go out to that outhouse that you can see at the back of that particular photograph. Now, once again, that is my great-grandfather, and that's William Pitts. Right now, our family cabin, which is now 95 years of age, and the significance of our cabin today is that back in November 17th of last year, Gilpin County designated our cabin as an historic landmark. So it is now in the Gilpin County history books as one of the historic buildings in Gilpin County. Now, what is important about my cabin, Lincoln Hills, was that during the 20s and 30s here in Colorado, the Colorado government, and we're talking about the mayor of Denver, we're talking about the governor of Colorado, they were all KKK members. I've been advised that in the 20s and 30s, there were 17,000 dues paying KK members in Colorado. We'll move past that particular slide because all that does is give my history. But if you look at that particular slide right there, that's my brother and I back in 1948. We are in front of the cabin, just to the right of the car. Back in about 1948, my grandfather built an additional bedroom onto the cabin. So he expanded the cabin in 1948 from the way it looked in 1926. So he added on that bedroom. But that particular photograph right there shows visitors coming, leaving Lincoln Hills. That would have been a train stop very close to Pine Cliff, Colorado, where those are basically teenage girls getting on the train, getting ready to go back to Denver or New York or Alabama. There were girls that came from all across the nation to the Black YWCA camp in 1939. My mother would have been 13 years of age. That particular photograph just shows my brother and I in front of the home that my great-grandfather built on 3rd and Garfield Street. So that home, and let me just continue talking right now before I go with any more slides. That home that my great-grandfather built in North Cherry Creek, the cabin that he built in Lincoln Hills, the importance is that demonstrated basically the self-reliance of Black people during that time, their resistance to the opposition of groups like the KKK, the opposition to discrimination and segregation, and the cabin up in Lincoln Hills and the people that visited Lincoln Hills, that was basically what I would call a safe haven, a place that Black people could go, they could relax, they could recreate, they could hunt and fish, and they were in a place that was basically an oasis for Black people from all across the country that would come to Lincoln Hills. I've been advised that at the lodge in Lincoln Hills, which was called Winks Lodge, and the other cabins that were connected to Winks Lodge, that during the summer, there'd be 5,000 people that would come from all across the country to Lincoln Hills. Lincoln Hills was designated in the Green Book. Those of you who I'm sure have read about the Green Book, which was the travel guide for Black people, letting Black people know where there were safe places, safe restaurants, safe homes, safe hotels that Black people could travel to when they were traveling throughout the country. Lincoln Hills was so notorious between 1926 and 1965 that it was visited by people such as entertainers that were internationally known, Count Basie, Louis Armstrong, Lena Horne. There were writers and artists such as Zelna Neale Hurston, Langston Hughes, and then there were national community business people like Whitney Young, who was the National Urban League director. So Lincoln Hills has a very, very important aspect in not only Colorado history, but the US history. You know, I see that my 15 minutes is up, and I don't believe Terry Nelson has arrived yet. So Steve, do you want to go on with your slideshow and talk
I
about?
sure can. I sure can.
All right, Steve.
Okay.
Before Mr. Shepard starts, Newell, why don't you introduce our next speaker?
Okay, so our next speaker is Mr. Steve Shepard, who was born and raised in Lawrence, Kansas, where he earned a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Kansas. After some time in the U.S. Army in Fort Carson, Colorado, Mr. Shepard married his wife, Ruth, and they now have 2 sons and 7 grandkids. He pursued entrepreneurship in the field of construction after several years of management with the JCPenney Company, becoming the co-owner and chief financial officer of BDI Construction Incorporation, a company that's been a part of several significant constructions, including the United Airlines air cargo facility at DIA and multiple elementary schools across the state. Mr. Steve Shepard is a keen contributor to the Colorado community, providing great service to several local organizations throughout the years, including the 5 Points Community and Community College of Denver Advisory Committees, and a beneficial contributor to children's education by being part of the Denver Elementary Schools tutorial program. He's held several important positions of the Denver graduate chapter of the Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporation, and in 2013 was selected as model man by the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. He now serves as the financial secretary of the GEH Scholarship Endowment. Mr. Shepard carries a love for Black history and the preservation of vintage automobiles and historical properties and buildings. His hobbies include historical reenactment, music, and he has a passion for golf.
Thank you very much, Neville. You know, once again, my background is in commercial construction. So naturally, that is what attracted me toward preserving Winks Lodge up in Lincoln Hills. But I think it would be good if I could give a bit of a social background. What brought this individual to be so inspired to create Winks Lodge? Back in 1865, at the end of the Civil War, there was a period called Reconstruction, which was a period that hopefully was to open up the general society to ex-slaves, former slaves, as well as free Blacks. But in 1877, that come to a screeching halt when they decided no, that wasn't necessarily a goal for the United States, that they should go into a period of Jim Crow, which was a period called separate but equal. And quite frankly, it could be perceived as a negative era. Mm-hmm. As you can tell, so many of the forward movements of the Black population was a result of that. I don't know if you've heard of Greenwood down in Oklahoma, almost a complete self-sufficient business community, which was destroyed in 1921. In 1910, right here in Colorado, Deerfield, an independent community being developed. But at any rate, oh Lord, 1922, when the need arose and the 2 Black developers developed Lincoln Hills, it was kind of like a natural progression of this need for separate but equal facilities. Now, what I'd like to do, I can go through Winks Lodge and just tell you how resourceful Wink was. Now, Wink's name was actually Aubrey Hamlet, but he, I guess he developed that nickname Wink because he was just, actually, he just loved to wink at the ladies. But at any rate, in this room, this was the original bedroom. But on that ceiling, you'll see metal ceiling tile. And those metal ceiling tile were repurposed from the demoed Denver Post building. So that was one of the items that he used just from salvaging it from other buildings. And the next slide. All right, this was, believe it or not, even after all those years, this was one of the original cabinets built by Wink. He was just an amazing carpenter, a finish carpenter, as well as a construction carpenter. Next. And this is the bedroom upstairs. Now the bathroom. The bathroom was not an original part of the building. And we'll see later the outhouse for this building, but it was built or installed in the late 40s, and it flows into a I guess actually not a city sewage system, but one that was developed on site. And this is Wink's winter sleeping quarters. This is down in the lower area there. And when Wink closed off the main portion of the building, he would sleep down in these winter quarters. And also in that same area was his work area. And also when he would receive extra over and above guests at Wink's Lodge, then he and his wife would both sleep down in this lower area. This is the original well system. It was a hand dug by Wink, and the building itself sits on a hillside slope. And that being the case, there were natural underground springs. So in digging this well, he tapped into one of those underground springs. Now, this well system was wonderful, but it did create a problem in later times when we were attempting to get or to transfer title. We discovered that Wink had not only built this well onto the National Forest Service, but he had also built a portion of his summer kitchen onto the National Forest Service. So it was a long process, but eventually we were able to acquire that portion of the National Forest Service as a part of the Wink's Lodge property. This is an outhouse. This is a unique outhouse, let's say. It was developed by the WPA, which was a, I'm sorry, Gary, what that acronym?
Work project. It's a
Work Project Administration, right. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a project to create work during the latter part of the Depression on into the early 40s.
Mm-hmm.
At any rate, that was one of the projects that they built. As well as this, this outdoor grill. This was another WPA project. And this is down in the picnic area. Okay, the progression of ownership back in 1965, Wink Hamblin passed away, and his wife maintained the property as long as she could. But back in 1965, the civil rights era created a situation where Blacks didn't necessarily have to go to areas that were set aside for Blacks. They could go to Vail and they could go to Aspen. So they did. And Wink's Lodge naturally lost its attraction to many of the folks who used to go there. And the first owners after Wink's widow was, Bertha Calloway. Bertha Calloway in 1980 was able to get the property placed on the National Historic Register. And then after that, for 20 years, this Rob and Martha Tomerlin from Texas purchased the property, and their original intent was to hold the property as a getaway or a place where troubled youth could come to and retrain and get counseling and so on. But the insurance, the liability insurance was just extremely too high, so they were not able to carry out those plans. But they loved the property, and over that period of 20 years, they were able to improve the structural integrity of the property. They were able to update the utilities, electrical, and so on. But I think it was 2005, they were able to decide that they wanted to go back to Texas, and they put the property on the market. At that time, the Beckworth Mountain Club, or recently renamed Beckworth Outdoors, was able to get a Colorado Foundation grant for $247,000, and were able to purchase the property. And next slide, please. So these are a group of folks from the Beckworth Club who immediately started to rehab the property to get it ready for public use. However, it still did need, per the architect's assessment, it did need a lot of architectural rehab work. But at any rate, the first step was to go in and do a cleanup. And this is in 2006. Next. And we just pulled a lot of things out of that structure. But at any rate, we were able to get to the point where we could stage it and stage each one of the bedrooms. We staged the living room and the dining room, all as close as possible back to the original, the original look of the Wink's Lodge. Okay. And this is one of the staged bedrooms here. Now, one thing I'd like to point out is that person in the middle of the picture there, this is Miss Marie Greenwood. Miss Marie Greenwood, at that point back in 2006, was most likely about 95 or 96 years old. But she was one of the original individuals who, as a preteen and teen, came up to Camp Nizoni as a Girl Scout. And she and many of the individuals that you see in this photo were just very excited to be there and to support the acquisition and the repurposing of Wink's Lodge as a historical structure. And this is Gary Jackson. And Gary and his wife, Regina, sponsored an open house for all of the individuals who supported the repurpose and purchase of Wink's Lodge back in 2005.
And Steve, that speaker is Governor Bill Ritter. So that's
yes, right. I'm sorry.
The former governor Bill Ritter, who came up to be at our initial open house.
Right. Thank you. Okay. And then for 3 years, the Beckworth Club, we held fundraisers. just to try to, obtain the funding so that we could continue with the repurposing and reconstruction and so on of Winks Lodge. And this was one of them. It was called the Lena Horn. And this is me. I was a reenactor, and I dressed as Wink Hamlet, and I greeted all of the guests. And we had many guests throughout the 3 years that we held those fundraisers, both from Gilpin County, as well as Colorado State and other city officials. And this is our reenactor who is performing as Lena Horn for one of our fundraisers. And this was the group. We were very successful during these fundraising activities. All right, and then during the time that the Beckwith Club was active with Winks Lodge, we were able to hold several youth field trips. They would come, these were youth from Denver schools who would come up, and we would give them tours and explain to them what we're explaining to you today. And then we also had from the local communities support from, now this is a local Boy Scout group who would come up, and they actually created the sign for Winks Lodge there. And they would come up, hold cleanup days. So just a tremendous amount of support throughout the time that we were, that the Beckwith Club had the building. All right, and then at that point, I just wanted to point out, as far as what I'm discussing, is just the perseverance and what it really took to put this together. Wink Hamlet went up to Lincoln Hills, and he was able to do all of this by hand. This is a 3,331 square foot building that he built by hand, pulled up all of the rocks and so on that he needed from the Boulder Creek down below. Most of the timber he was able to cut out of the forest. So it just took a lot of resourcefulness and ingenuity to get it done. But Gary also mentioned the Green Book. And I do happen to have a copy of the Green Book. This is a 1955 copy that was still in effect in 1955. And Winks Lodge was advertised in the 1955, in the 1955 publication. There are quite a few more items to cover, but I would like to.
I was about to say, Steve, we've got Terry Nelson here.
Okay.
And if Newell can introduce Terry Nelson, Terry can be our next speaker.
All right, so Miss Charleszine Terry Nelson is a Colorado native born and raised in Denver, where she attended Manual High School. She also attended the University of Colorado Boulder, where she earned her bachelor's degree in psychology and sociology. She received her master's degree in information technology and library science from the Emporia State College in Kansas. Ms. Nelson is the co-author of Recruiting and Managing Volunteers in Libraries, which is a beneficial manual for several managers that is used across the United States. She's had 30 years of library experience, and among many things was the manager of volunteer services at Denver Public Library. She's the Special Collection and Community Resource Manager for the Blair Caldwell African American Research Library in Colorado. Ms. Terry is the Vice Chair of the MLK Junior Colorado Holiday Committee and also part of the Board of Directors for the 5 Points Business District, the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporation, and the Links Incorporation. A portrait of Ms. Terry Nelson is presented in a solo exhibition by Dwayne Glupoint in the exhibit Faces in the Crowd.
Hello,
Hello.
everyone. That was a mouthful there that you talked about. Thanks for the great introduction. I'm sorry I'm a tad late, but when I read the change in time, I was in the middle of another meeting and on my way home. So please forgive my lateness. I don't know how far you've gotten along, but I thought I'd just do a few little tidbits about Lincoln Hills that perhaps as a librarian, I always try to bring something along. So there's a little book pamphlet that was written by Jesse Du Bois. They call it Jess Du Bois. It talks about Lincoln Hills that might be available in some of your libraries that you can read about his family and their work at the Winks Lodge, where his parents, his mother in particular, was the cook. And he is an artist and still living in Denver, Colorado. I think now he lives in Aurora. And he has done and had a huge gallery in the mountains where they were when they were up at Links. And he has many funny stories about having to go there and having his mother get after him because he wasn't doing the right thing when it came his turn to clean up. And that wonderful engine that you saw in the picture, I think you showed that to them, did you not, Steve? That they used as kind of a pump for the well. They also used it in something similar to pull as a pulley up there. It's amazing the ingenuity that our owner there had with him, with all the things that he could do with he really made something out of nothing and he used his hands to do it all. But I'd like to tell you a little bit also about Camp Nizoni and that little lady that Steve talked about, Mrs. Greenwood. She was first a camper there in Camp Nizoni up in Lincoln Hills. And then she became the actual camp person to be in charge. And because while she was up there, she and many other Denverite young ladies, in addition to children from around the United States, came to Lincoln Hills to actually look and be a part of Camp Nizoni. Camp Nizoni, the name is an Indian name and it means beautiful. And to get there, they often came up on a railroad train, and I think you may have heard of the Moffat Tunnel, and it took forever, but coming through on the Moffat Tunnel, and I don't know how many years we paid for that taxes to build that Moffat Tunnel, but many of the people from Denver and the other parts of the country came to Lincoln Hills up to Gilpin County. And the young ladies who came, the camp was actually put together for underserved and minority children because the Y did not allow them to go to the regular camps, the regular big Y and the professional camps. So the people at Lincoln Hills decided they would have a camp for the children. And many young adults, and you saw pictures of them getting off of that little train that came up the track, and it was called a dinghy. And it was called dinghy because it was a little tiny train, and it had actually an engine, a steam engine, a coal car, and a passenger car. And that was how they got to the mountains. It was clear back in 1926, so there wasn't much to offer there. anyhow, this is how these people often came up to Winks Lodge, but it was also known as a really, really beautiful place to come where you could recreate and not be bothered with the troubles of the world in terms of segregation and those things that were unpleasant for minorities. Actually, in Mr. William Hitz Jr. was one of the major developers there too, and he built his own cabin, and he built a couple of more to actually rent. And I think you talked about Jenny Rucker. She had a cabin up there and used it until I think probably until her death. Numerous African Americans in the city and county of Denver also came, but to build that area in Winks Lodge, the Lincoln Hills Development Company that was formed in 1922 were a group of African American doctors, and they went together, purchased some of the land for $40, and it advertised for the all over the country. And in addition, they probably had ads in that green book. I haven't had a chance to look through that, to tell people to come to the mountains, to Lincoln Hills. It said it was a 2-hour drive from Gilpin County, and it was 8,500 feet from sea level and 2 miles from the town of Pine Cliff, Colorado. And their advertisement, the letter went out to the whole community. And I'd like to read the letter. It was from Dr. Westbrook. He was a physician and a surgeon. And he wrote to 2 of his other doctor friends. And he said, "Gentlemen, there's no site in Colorado more desirable for a mountain home than Lincoln Hills. Easy of access by both auto and railroad. This was the last opportunity for colored people to get to and have such a location. In a few years," he said, it will be impossible for a group to get anything one half as desirable as summer camping here. When the tunnel was completed, the Moffett Tunnel would be the transcontinental line passing directly through this property. And even for a speculator, the property looms large. There was no segregation about it, only a chance to get a large acreage where we can go in peace and contentment, surrounded by friends, and enjoy ourselves. I have lived in Colorado for 25 years and have seen Bear Creek Canyon, Estes Park, Daniels Park, and other territories adjacent to Denver built by the white people. Surely this is one opportunity we must take advantage of. With best wishes for success, I am sincerely Dr. J.H.P. Westbrook, MD. He helped to build the actual area with those kinds of letters they sent around as a publicity piece to build and help build Lincoln Hills. So it's people like that that helped to make it such a success. And then people like Marie Greenwood, who was the camp counselor up there, took care of the kids and made camping a wonderful experience. And some of the girls that she talked about before she died at 106, she said they love to come and get into the river and play and fish. They also love to go at night and listen to the crickets and the wonderful evenings. So there were, as I can remember, that of people I have known who have been there was Frances Curran, she was there. And even, I'm not sure that Grace went, her sister, but they felt that it was a large setting of land where one could get away. And the children that went there felt like it was a real treat to have the opportunity to go to the mountains, because they would not have had that opportunity because they were not allowed to go in the early 2030s and 40s. So those are some of the interesting people that lived there. Dr. Jenny Rucker was a librarian at the Denver Public Library, but she was also a professor at Metro. And I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to meet her, but she was a very active librarian as well as a historian. We had the pleasure of having her presence with us. All of those people that I talked about have now passed on, but they have left an indelible impression about the beauty of Lincoln Hills and Winks Lodge and where they stayed and what they did. So the children that got that opportunity to visit Winks Lodge really had a special opportunity. Once the Y actually took it over, then people kind of stopped coming to Winks Lodge in the 40s after the civil rights after the Civil Rights Bill and its induction actually allowed people to go any place. The actual population that attended Winks Lodge began to, it was fewer people coming up. But up until then, it was one of the most popular getaway places to come, and both adults and children love that place. You have any questions about some of the people that visited? I'm happy to talk about those. I don't want to go over my time. I didn't hear, I heard a little ding, so tell me if I'm over my time.
Well, I think that this is probably a good time for questions and answers, but what I'd like to tell to the group is that there is a very good exhibit at History Colorado on Lincoln Hills. So that's an exhibit that has been in place for about 8 years. So it's on the second floor of History Colorado, if you'd like to see the Colorado History exhibit on Lincoln Hills.
And may I add that if they would like to come to the Blair Caldwell Library, they will be able to look at Jenny Rucker's collection, and she actually has maps from Gilpin County that shows the squares of land that people purchased to build their little cabins, and you can even see their names on there. Her collection is a wealth of information about Lincoln Hills and Winks Lodge.
She was in the slide speaking to the Tomerlands that earlier. Yeah.
Good. Any more questions?
Would you tell it, I have a question. Could you guys tell us more about today? How many families still have cabins there?
I don't know how many, but I know that there are still some. I think
Well,
Smith
I
still
can
have
speak to that.
his.
Yeah, so
Okay.
Terry, I can speak to that.
Yeah.
The relatives of Sam Carey, who the Sam
Oh,
Carey Bar
yes.
Association is
Mhm.
named after, they still have property in Lincoln Hills.
Mhm.
Chuck Smith
Right.
has property that is right next to my property.
Mhm.
And then probably the most prominent Black man in the country, Robert Smith, now probably owns 2/3 of Lincoln Hills. So he has his mountain home in Lincoln Hills. So I would say that of the original homeowners that built cabins in Lincoln Hills, there's only 4 or 5 of us left. But the most important thing is that as Terry Nelson was saying, when it was first developed, it was developed by developers who called it the Lincoln Hills Country Club Development. It was to be an area of homes and cabins and recreation for Black people from across the nation. It has come full circle now that Robert Smith has purchased maybe two-thirds of Lincoln Hills, that it is still a country club area for Black people. And it, of course, is a place that is welcoming to all people and a great place to visit.
And it is still a wonderful panoramic view. I was asked during the Colorado historical designation, why is it called Winks Panorama when it actually is surrounded by a forest? The answer to that is when the Pactolus mine was active there, they had just decimated the whole forest. There were no trees, and most of them had been used over in Central City. So at that time, it was a panoramic view, but now the trees and forests have beautifully grown up around Winks Lodge.
I don't want to keep, if anybody has any questions, just let me know. And if you could put them in the chat, but I'm curious if you guys could talk to the fact that that people of color could go to Lincoln Hills and have these amazing weekends and then have to go back to the city. And what was that? Could you speak to that contrast between what they faced in the city and the discrimination that was there versus that comfort level of being at Lincoln Hills? Because that's what I thought I heard you talking. That's what it sounded like to me.
Well, Celeste, I'll speak on behalf of my great grandfather and my grandparents. My grandmother was well educated. She went to Lincoln University, got a degree in 1917. But despite the fact that she had a teaching degree, that because of discrimination here in Colorado, she could not work as a teacher. So she ended up being a salad lady at the VA. My grandfather worked in the slaughterhouse. So that's a very, very difficult job. And so, for my grandparents to be able to leave difficult working situations in Denver, to be able to go up to our cabin in Lincoln Hills, to have some peace and calm, and to be able to recreate freely was really an oasis for them. But let me just talk about the ride up to Lincoln Hills. There was a community, Wonderview, that we couldn't stop because of Jim Crow policies. They would not serve food or provide gas to us in Wonderview. So when we left Denver, as I indicated, back in the 30s and 40s, it was a 4-hour drive to get there. The first place that we could stop for refreshment would be Pine Cliff. So we had to go through Wonderview because we could not stop there. We would stop at Pine Cliff, where they had a post office, a grocery store. And so that gives you some of the elements of what segregation, what Jim Crow, what it meant to have to work in employments that were under your level of education. That's what it was like for my grandparents.
And a very strong example of that is that we mentioned all of these well-known artists who would come to Denver to perform at the and so on and so forth, and writers who would come during the Writers' Renaissance. But and folks would ask, well, did they perform at Winks Lodge and Lincoln Hills? No, they did not. There anyone else, they were escaping that same environment by going up to Winks Lodge and in Lincoln Hills. Those well-known folks were just as comfortable up there as they could be anywhere. And, that's a very strong example. Zora Neale Hurston, very well-known writer, Duke Ellington, Count Basie, I mean, you know, and these folks are going up there where there was an outdoor toilet, but they were there, they were safe, they were secure, and they enjoyed it.
They had no worries.
That's right.
Said no worries. They could be themselves.
That's right.
The
Well,
Ella
Miss-
Fitzgeralds, the what's her name? The lady that everybody talks about with the gardenia.
Oh, Lena Horne.
Lena Horne. They
Sure.
loved it. The last thing I read about was what pleasure she felt going up there.
Right.
Well, I'm going to have to leave because I have another engagement, but I want to thank everybody for hearing my great-grandfather's story and my grandparents' story. And I hope that you all will take an opportunity to go over to the museum. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Judge Jackson.
Right.
Does-
Judge Jackson didn't tell you about the wonderful book his mother wrote.
Yeah.
What is it? Tell us.
She talks about her whole life. It's very autobiographical, but she does mention in there their owning of the property. And I'm not sure if the book checks, we have a copy that checks out or not. Steve, did you know if we have one? I know.
You know, I know my wife purchased one
Okay,
in our home library here.
right. I know that Western
Very interesting.
History at downtown at Western History, she gave a copy to Western History, and I have one at the Blair Caldwell Library.
Yes, okay.
Wonderful, just a wonderful rendezvous through her years of living in Denver, Colorado, and the issues that her son just talked about.
So will you tell us, I think last month, one of the things we found was that finishing with what your thoughts are about moving forward. I mean, how do you feel now in terms of progress, in terms of next steps, in terms of what's the future of Lincoln Hills, but what's the future of all the heritage? I think you know what I'm trying to ask. Where are we
Yeah.
headed, and where is Lincoln Hills?
Yes.
How is Lincoln Hills part of that?
It's an example of what can be done in terms of a group of people with nothing, to start with nothing and make a beautiful oasis out of the Lincoln Hills area. And now that other people have owned it, with more people being involved, and they're renovating it and getting it up to par for a regular resort again, it is a perfect example of what positive things one can do with the one can do attitude. And it's critical for the youngsters to be able to see what can be done. And also in terms of looking at the countryside and seeing the horses that you can ride and the beautiful flowers and the place that the old first railroad trains came up to. And now it's not like that. The meadow is not there, but they're great memories. And those memories build character, and it gives the youngsters pride, as well as it does the elders. And those elders that remember that place are very happy and to talk about what happened at Lincoln Hills.
I agree. You know, I normally, because my background is in commercial construction, and I really enjoy talking about the preservation and of buildings and so on. But it's more important to talk about the legacy. What did these folks teach us back in 22 and 25? And they taught us that you can persevere and just, you know, go right past any obstacle. But it takes just a lot of effort, and it takes a love for doing what you're doing. And that's the lesson that we should learn from history. And so there's plenty of history, even right here in Colorado, of what Black folks have done in the past and what they can do now and what they can do in the future. It's all there.
And that's one thing we do at the library is try to capture that history and get
Yes.
oral histories from those who are still with us. We have a stellar oral history of Marie Greenwood, who passed at 6. You can listen to her tell her life story, her lived story, and look at how warm and lovely she felt about what happened to her as a youngster in Colorado. Many people I have found in my travels, they think that there are no African Americans in Colorado. Plus, they think we're still riding horses. So this will open up the world to how great we are.
I have to say, I'm going to do a shout out for Miss Terry. I've known Miss Terry now for 18 years, the age of my son. And I can't walk in that library without leaving feeling like I've just walked into a path of happiness. So she's right. She is a wealth of resources, that's for sure. You know, Mr. Shepard, when Kayla and I visited Lincoln Hills this fall, we were able to reach down in the creek. We could have, had we been that forward, we could have reached down into the creek and plucked out a trout the size of I don't know what.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
there's a lot of jealousy, I think, among people wanting to be in that creek.
That's right. Well, you know, that's due to Robert Smith's efforts. One of his dreams is just to create that fishing environment up there, and he's done it.
Well, it's impressive, that's for sure. My mouth was watering the whole time we were there. I will say that.
Plus
Does it
the wonderful landscape that he has
Oh, yes.
invented up there. It's beautiful.
He had to overcome quite a bit. During the Depression, during the 30s, there was a quest for gold, and there was the dredging of all of the streams and creeks, and especially right there at Boulder Creek, dredging operation, which really damaged the creek. So that had to be repaired when he started to redevelop. In fact, when they started dredging that area, they had to remove the bridge for the Camp Nizoni participants. So the train couldn't stop right there below. Nizoni had to stop in Pine Cliff. And for 2 or 3 years, I think Winks had to take his pickup truck and pick up the young ladies who came up to Camp Nizoni. So it did change the operations.
Well, it's a beautiful place. Do you think,
Yes, it is.
do you think that it will evolve into a full development? And do you think that it will stay true to its heritage for the Black culture, for Black individuals? Or what do you foresee happening there?
I think like most developments like that, you know, we can only keep the legacy alive. We're not necessarily going to be able to keep it a Black or a Black area, but the fact that it was started and enjoyed by, that's what we try to preserve.
Right.
Necessarily the buildings either. It's legacy, that fact that folks up against a lot of odds could develop kind of thing, and it's possible. And that's what I'm sure that Ms. Nelson would agree, but that's what we're trying to pass on, just this attitude that you can do.
Well, thank you. Anybody have any questions? We have several people still on, and does anybody have any questions? I know that one very prominent member of our Black heritage in Denver is on here with us. Anna Joe's daughter, Mary, is on. I don't know if you saw her, Miss Terry, but
I see her now. Yeah.
Yeah. Good
I
evening.
know I recognize that smiling face. She probably has some stories too.
Oh, not very many, but I just wanted to be here this evening to hear those of you who have kept this legacy for all of us to know and learn and grow from. So I'm sorry I didn't get here right when you all started, but I'm glad to have been here to hear any part of it. So thanks for doing this, Celeste, and for you all
Thank you.
for keeping our history, our Colorado history, our Colorado Black history alive.
It
We've
is
had
a pleasure.
well, we've had a lot of requests to make sure, because it fell during that time and a lot of people were coming back and forth from work. So we've had a lot of requests from people who want to make sure that we post the recording so that they can see it. So we'll definitely will be
Great.
doing that. Yeah.
Oh,
Great,
good.
great.
Yeah, that's good.
And if you haven't, if I want to make sure that I say this in the recording, if you haven't, in addition to Lincoln Hills, and I don't know, how open is it? It's not open really, is it now for public to just go?
Not yet, as far as
Okay.
it's not, because it's still in the developmental stage. They've gone, I think they've gotten another architect's assessment, and they're, I think they've also applied for historical preservation grant. So there are just a lot of steps that they need to go through.
Well, we have a great video of our tour, so we'll post that along with this posting. But what I was going to add was, in addition, Mary alluded to the amazing, and I think you're right, Mary. A lot of people don't understand how rich the Black history is in Colorado. Kayla and I also got a personalized tour of the Black American West Museum this fall. And so that's another amazing resource just down the street from Miss Terry, actually, right down the street and around the corner. Yeah.
Yes,
So,
California and 29th.
yep. And that's Dr. Justina Ford's old house. So it was a cool
Yes.
thing to be there.
That's a fantastic history, and we're thankful for the donation that Dr. Renee Cousins King put into the museum, the Black American West Museum, to fix the structure and all. And then of course that began to bloom, and they got another national actual donation grant kind of thing. And I'm sure that some of that will come here, because Gary has gotten this on the National Register now. He worked and got actually completed. So we'll have to make sure that that gets up there someplace so that people will know. I'm sure that they will create something like that. But the history, kids just can't even believe folks are running in the river, getting off a train to get to the cabins, and they couldn't believe that they could be out at night in a place like a big forest and get them. There were no bears or the wildlife, let them alone, and they got to enjoy the flowers. And that's one of the wonderful things that Marie Greenwood used to do, is take the children in the meadow and have them go through and identify different flowers and weeds and that kind of thing, so they'd understand what they could do with them in terms of cooking them or using them or making a big bouquet. It was that kind of adventure for youngsters too, there with Camp Nozzoni. So
It makes me wish I'd gone there.
as a Girl Scout or whatever.
Right. Well, I want to respect everybody's time. Does anybody have any more questions? Because I know we said we'd be finished at 6. Newell?
You know, I don't have a question, but I'd like to put a plug in for Ms. Nelson and myself. We're in a PBS
Yes.
on Barney Ford.
Barney Ford.
And they did a wonderful job of it.
They certainly did.
Yeah, if you have time, tune in.
On YouTube. It's on YouTube.
Oh, yes, right.
I was-
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
I was privileged. I got to see a preview of it last night. And I gotta tell you, it was really, it is really, really good. I hope that everybody will take a moment to see the video. And Miss Terry, you guys were both amazing in the documentary. It was really good. was fun to see you last night too. So Newell, you had a question. I think I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. What is one thing that you guys would want, like the youth that don't know much about Lincoln Hills, to take away from its legacy?
My thing would be the love of nature and the history that African Americans created up there is not unusual to the United States of America, because there are many stories like this in Denver and Colorado, in addition to the nation.
Yeah, very briefly, just the same thing. Just the legacy of perseverance and loving what you do.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I feel like we just had a feel-good hour and 15 minutes. So thank you. It makes me, I hope it makes everybody feel as good as it does me. It certainly is contrasting to some of what we're hearing and seeing. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you for inviting
With that, I
Thank
will
you.
say, oh, we appreciate it. Oh, you know, Mr. Shepard, I have one more question. I'm sorry.
Sure.
So JR kind of told on you, and
Mhm.
JR sort of told on you. And for those of you who don't, JR is he's the executive director for Lincoln Hills Foundation.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
Well, he said that you're a big outdoor ed teacher.
Mhm.
Did you know that that's the way he classifies you?
Well, thank you. We'll leave it at
That's
that.
cute. That's great. It's always our pleasure to share the wonderful stories.
Well, we thank you. And thank
All right.
everybody else. We'll be posting
Thank you.
this.
Okay.
We'll be posting on our website
All right.
and on our Facebook page.
And best wishes with the program. It's wonderful.
Yes, it
Thank you.
is.
We have two
Uh-huh.
contests this weekend, so we're excited. We
Oh.
have the charter school. Sarah. Sarah Takatatsu just came on, and she's an alumni of History Day for a very long time. She's in Washington, D.C. right now. Mr.
Oh.
Shepard, will you say again? There she is. Say hi. Tell me again the fraternity you're involved in.
Alpha Phi Alpha.
Is that it, Sarah?
Tell them that's the fraternity that Martin Luther King was.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So
Mhm.
Sarah's boyfriend is involved in a fraternity as well. Which one is his fraternity, Sarah?
Kappa.
Kappa.
He's a
okay.
Kappa.
Or Kappa Alpha Psi.
Yeah, they're okay.
Now.
That was you.
That's wonderful. Great.
I was texting her while you were talking and saying, I think that he's talking about your boyfriend's fraternity. And so I have a feeling that's why she just joined us. But Sarah, thanks for joining us.
Oh yeah, sorry. The time zones, I got mixed up. I was in another meeting and all the fun things, but I had to like jump in where I could. It was
Great.
Well, this
All right.
kind of presentation encouraged jumping in.
Yes, it does.
It does.
glad it wasn't too much of an interruption or anything.
Well, thank you, everybody, very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
We
Thank you for the
appreciate you.
opportunity. Yes. thank
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks
Yeah.
for doing
Take
this,
care.
Celeste.
Mhm.
All
Thank
right.
you. Bye, Mary.
Bye.
Bye.